Hello CIS25. In this video, I'm going to go over the lecture and also the Unit 8 assignment. So when you follow along with this particular video, it would be helpful if you look at your lecture notes and also your assignment. So in the chapter for the second part of chapter 5, it goes over the troubleshooting technique for hard drive, display, and printer. Um, and in the first part here, what we see is the book talks about working with hard drive. Now, when you have a read and write failure, is either the drive is being damaged, you might have a damaged cable, or the SATA host adapter on the motherboard is. So in that case, you have to look at some of the possible issues where what could happen to the drive. Now, in the physical damage of the drive, if there is any kind of reduction in magnetic that can cause the damage in the read and write head, sometimes that would just be on the manufacturing side that would cause that. So you would hear noise that will be from the drive. If you have damaged cable, we would then swap the cable, and we simply just test it with a known good cable. So you can find a good SATA cable and test it. If the host adapter is damaged for the SATA connection, some of the ports, you might want to swap that to with the different ports. But if the different ports is not available, then you would need to take a look at how that motherboard is not supporting multiple SATA and possibly replace the board. If your drive is overheating, so as it would turn and you would have higher RPM, there would be more heat generated. So we would want to add in the fan to reduce the heat. If you're using drive bays, if it's limited with airflow, so make sure that you have thorough airflow. And we can move the drive to a location of a different area of the bay where it would have more airflow so it will cool. If the CPU is overheated because of it's overclocked or it's working overtime, or the motherboard or the chipset, that can also cause read-write failure. So what we want to do is we want to remove the dirt, debris, or anything that prevents air from coming into the case or leaving the case. We want to remove any kind of failed heatsink and make sure that we apply thermal paste for the CPU. And in the system itself, we should also add fans and such. So for the first question, we want to note those things, and you don't have to put it verbatim, or you can just clip it from the notes and include that. But for CompTIA A+, make sure we know how to troubleshoot the hard drive. So the common causes of the drive and how would you detect those issues. So in the physical damage, we want to make sure that we listen for noise. For the damaged cable, we would test it with the known good cable. For the damaged SATA host, we would test it with the original cable and with the different connecting to a different port. With the overheated hard disk, we would check airflow. And if you have other drive base area, we want to move the drive to that location. Overheated CPU and chipset, we want to check case fan, power supply fan, remove the dust. That would be where the air is being pulled in. Remove old thermal paste, and we remove the failed heatsink, replace it with a different heatsink, and reapply a new thermal paste. So those are some of the things that you can look for and how you would overcome those issues. Now, in the slow performance of the drive, we need to reduce the performance configuration. So on some drive, there would be a jumper, which is in the back of the drive, and that can cause it to go at a slower rate. Different SATA settings will also is going to be impacted in that the transfer rate is slower. So if you want 6 gigabit per second, make sure that it is set for that. And for your host adapter, if it is an IDE, we need to go to BIOS setup and be able to change the mode. And if the host adapter is configured with a slower speed, it's also going to impact that logically. So a jumper would look like this. It's like a notch that you would put over the pins. This is used to really configure for some of the SATA drive. So that configuration is important to also look at physically. For a solid state drive, we would connect the drive and we would test it with different SATA host adapter on the board. Possibly also look at the cable. If the partitions on the drive are misaligned, then we would need to go to this part, or we would go to this management console in order to do that. The trim command is not enabled in the drive in that if it does support trim, or if it doesn't support trim, you have to use the utility to reallocate the deleted drive sector because it doesn't do that on its own if it doesn't support trim. So when you delete certain data, what it does is it should give that back, but if it doesn't have that feature, then it won't be able to do that. And we don't want to, if it's not optimized for the system to use SSD in the later Windows, like Windows 7, 8, and 10, we don't really need to defrag or re-optimize the drive. And so the Windows does not only detect, it's not always going to detect SSD. And so you can also use a different type of tool, a third-party tool to configure on the Windows to give it a max speed. But other than that, you don't optimize the SSD. It would tell you that when you try to do so, and we saw this in our last week lab. So when you hear loud noise, repeatedly, you would know that it might be a defective disk. If you hear humming noise, and that could be caused by the rapid head movement. So noise can be eliminated by using the automatic acoustic management, which is AAM. This is a feature on most of your common hard disks. Now, if it doesn't boot, we want to check the boot sequence. We want to go to your BIOS or your CMOS settings. And if the CMOS settings is corrupted, it would not be able to find the boot drive. So that might be the cause as well. Your boot configuration data is stored in the control booting environment. If that is corrupted, then you need to fix it. And I put a link for you to go how to look for that and be able to fix it. If drive is not recognized, if a bus powered USB hard disk is not recognized via 2.0 or 3.1, then what we want to do is we want to test it with another system that's known good. It could be that the system is not able to send enough power to that USB port. And so you can try it with the different USB root hub and see if it's able to detect that, or with another system. Your SATA hard disk or your SSD. If it's not recognized, it could be that it's missing power connection or data connection. So check the cable. We want to disconnect the power, we want to disconnect the data, and then we want to reconnect and see. If you use a Y splitter converter for power, just keep in mind that those tend to fail. If your operating system is not found and there's no bootable disk because it's configured to go to a certain drive and that drive doesn't contain bootable sector or bootable files. So make sure that we go into the setup and change our sequence of our boot. If there's incorrect installation of the operating system or operating system is corrupted, that could also cause it. Now, other cases you would have RAID, and RAID is used for backup drives. So if RAID is not found, it's because the drive has failed, especially with RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 10, and RAID 5. If the drive has failed, you have to replace it and rebuild the array, the group of drives. If 2 or more drives fail, it simply doesn't work, then you have to go through the recovery options and hopefully you'll be able to pull some data. Most of your hard disk drive serial ATA uses what's called the smart errors. So this allows it to self-monitor and analyze and report using SMART, which stands for Self-Monitoring, Analysis, and Reporting Technology. So it's important to really monitor the temperature of your drive, the read and write, read retries, slow spin up, bad sectors. Now, typically SMART would give you the warning in the case if there's intermittent failures to the disk or if your system have some kind of failure accessing the data. And here it talks about how you should check your attributes. You can use check this. And if the vendor supplied additional utility, you can also take a look at, your vendor website to see if they're given that. If you're using this or having issues with the disk on laptop or hard disk, you can use a third-party app to be able to test it. And sometimes manufacturer would recommend their own apps to test the drive. So in the next question, it asks you, how can you improve performance on a SATA disk? We would remove the jumper or set the jumper to the rated drive speed, so making sure that it is at its appropriate speed. Use appropriate SATA cable with the correct speed. Configure SATA host adapter for the appropriate mode like IDE, RAID, AHCI. Also choose auto setting on the SATA host adapter, which allows it to adjust the speed appropriately. If we want to improve performance on the solid state drive, you can pull this from the notes, but we want to make sure that we are connecting it to the right ports. We can also use this part to align and create the partition command. We can run the utility by providing driver, vendor, and reallocated the deleted drive sector. We can use SSD tweaker utility to configure the windows for the maximum performance. Now in question 4, it tells you that Tanya heard a loud clicking noise when she's using the computer PC. What advice would you give her to fix the problem? So for Tanya, when she hears the noise, the loud clicking noise could typically be the repeated rereads of the defective disk surfaced by the actual hard disk drive heads. This is a sign of a failing drive, so suggested that we back up the data and replace the hard disk drive immediately, and that would reduce the noise. We can also use the noise reduction tool, but this is a case of the hard disk failure. For number 5, it tells you that Mark installed the new SATA hard drive on his computer, but it is not recognized by the operating system. What should Mark do to troubleshoot the problem? Mark should shut down his computer, disconnect the AC power, reconnect the power and the data cable, access BIOS and see if the drive is recognized. Then we'll format the drive for use. Anna recently installed Windows 10 on her PC. She restarts the computer and the monitor displays no OS is found. What should Anna do to fix the problem? So we would remove the non-bootable USB, restart the system and access BIOS, set up sequence and primary hard drive that use Windows 10. I would also suggest to see if once we fix that, we reboot, and if it continues to have problem, that means the boot sector is damaged. The boot section of the drive is damaged as it was written or something corrupted it. For number 7, it asks about SMART. So describe the purpose of using self-monitoring analysis reporting technology SMART. It is used for monitoring drive temperature, read retries, slow spin up, too many bad sectors, drive failure, intermittent warning. So those are the things that SMART will give you, and you will be able to detect issues with the drive by looking at the information or the report. So now let's go back to our notes and we will cover the rest here. So in display, there are different modes for the device. There's a VGA mode, and VGA is used to connect your adapter. So when you're looking at the VGA port, it would be blue and it has 2 screws on the side. Now VGA was very common for its time, but now it's been replaced by HDMI and DisplayPort. So when we install VGA, we want to make sure that the drivers are seen for your adapter, your graphic processing unit, which is your video card. So we want to make sure that the driver is installed. We also want it to use the chipset driver, which is for the motherboard where that adapter is plugged in. So you would go to Device Manager and you wanted to make sure that you install the new driver for the adapter and make sure that the chipset driver is been installed so it's recognized it. If there's no image on screen, check the power button, making sure that we also check the configuration of the actual monitor or screen. Sometimes you would use the button on the monitor or screen itself to make sure that it's adjusted for contrast. Sometimes that could be very dim and you don't see that. So we want to also reconnect the cable to the display and turn it back on. Now we would then set up or use a way to access the display if you're able to see. So on the desktop, if there's no image, check power display cable, input settings, and that could be varied from one system to another, but we would start with the power. On the projector, sometimes if the lens cap is closed, then you would not be able to see, or the power button is not pressed, or input is not changed accordingly. Now, in the overheat shutdown, some display, it would turn it off because it's running too hot, especially for projection. So it needs a way to cool, so you gotta wait for it to cool in order for it to turn it back on. So then we would try to, if the GPU overheats, then usually the display is would then be shut down. You might have some dead pixel, and dead pixel is just a defect in LCD. So when you're looking at dead pixel, you would have like a small pixel that would be either really bright or really dark. And to fix that, you can use J Screen Fix, and you can also drag the app to the area and be able to run that. Okay. You can also use a stylus or something that would be very blunt and a narrow end, and you would be able to press lightly over it, and it should be able to just resolve that. So you can see the information on that. You can also use UD Pixel. That's another tool that you can use. Now, screen artifacts are just distorted shapes, color, pixelated image, scrambled text, and so on. This can be caused by overheated GPU, overclocked GPU, overcompressed graphics, and so on. So we want to check the card's cooling fan. We want to check heatsink for the CPU, and also our fan for our system if it's hot. We want to turn off overclocking or turbocharge, and we want to keep the system running on normal clock speed after that. If you get incorrect color pattern, we want to make sure we adjust it in the menu. On the DLP projector, check the LED light sources, red, green, or blue, or Descartes mirrors. Sometimes that could be an odd color spec that was set. On the laptop, the LCD ribbon connector of the motherboard might be damaged, so we might have to replace the ribbon. If the external display works and the LCD ribbon of the cable is inside the laptop, then the way that you can check is you can plug your laptop to a monitor and see if it turns on. If the external display shows the image and your screen on the laptop doesn't work, that means that the connection for that screen might be damaged or it is damaged. So we want to check the video cable. We want to check the connection with the screen. If you get the dim image, check the brightness control. Sometimes also this could be related to the driver and the configuration of the actual display. On the projector, if the bulb becomes milky or it reduces output, it's because it's about to die. So we would then have to replace the bulb. On the device like tablets, you might, if it's dim and it stays dim, you might have a backlight issue, so you want to check the inverter. And this could also go for screens in general. So failing inverter is going to dim the display before the inverter actually stops working. If you have flicker image, we want to make sure that we check the video adapter and the chipset driver. Now, sometimes the LCD CFL backlight flicker, it's caused by failing inverter or failing backlight. So when you're playing game, if you have distortion in the image, it could be because it's old driver, compression issues, connections problem. and so on. But if it's distorted geometry in the LCD or LED, some of these might be the factors. On the projections, if they're LCD or LED, you can look at keystoning, and it would have a way to do the keystone option for correction. If it's not a 100-degree angle at the projection, the image might appear distorted. So we want to adjust and make sure that it's angled correctly. And sometimes you would have the 2 feet where you can adjust the angle on how you want it to project. With the curved screen, like curved screen HDTV, there is some slight geometric distortion, and it would be in a greater off axis for the viewing angles. So sometimes you would have burn-in. That means that the image, even though your screen changed, you can still see a shadow of that image. And to avoid the image persistence for the display in the LCD views, you need to make sure that the display sleep to turn off the display when idle. And we want to change the image or use persistent image. On the plasma, if that can wear off over time, and it sometimes wears off unevenly, and that can cause burn-in. So we have different tips on how to deal with burn-in, or if you have oversized image or icon, you can change the resolutions, and you can fix by restarting the system after you change the display property. On the mobile devices, if you have no display, likely that you should check for backlight. You can also, if it's connected something, you can also take a look at the cable connection and power, of course. So here it talks about different types of devices and how to be able to fix the issues. Make sure you know them for A+, and for practice. So coming back to the assignment, question 8 asks you about Felipe. Felipe is setting up the presentation for the conference room using his laptop and the projector. He's unable to see any image on the projector. What should Felipe troubleshoot? How should Felipe troubleshoot the issue? He should check the lens cap or the shutter to make sure that it's open. Check the image source selection. Make sure that the computer source is configured to use projector as an extended desktop. So that's in the display settings. And check the power for the video and the video cable. So those are the things that will help him. And as he goes through each one, if that doesn't work, he will then eliminate, like what we talked about with the troubleshooting technique. We will come up with a theory for the causes, possible solutions, and go through and complete what's needed, and then document. What are the causes for the display artifacts? That could be from overheating GPU or projector, overclocked GPU, or overcompressed graphics. Overcompressed video, low resolution video, image enlarged in the higher resolution display. So how should you troubleshoot flickering issue on a laptop LCD monitor? We would update GPU driver. We would check failing inverter, replace inverter if needed. Check the backlight failure and replace the monitor if the backlight fails. For question 11, it asks you, how would you avoid persistent image on an LCD monitor and plasma monitor? We can use screensaver. We can change to full screen and use wash screen clean feature on the plasma. Next, we're going to talk about other troubleshooting areas. So in your chapter, it talks about how to work with mobile devices, such as sticking keys problem on laptop or tablet. We don't need to replace all the keyboard. Sometime we can replace individual key, or we can take a look at how we can clean the keys when the system is off. And intermittent wireless, in that it's not able to keep wireless stability. We want to look at how we can improve Wi-Fi reception, line to site, and looking at the signal strength of the wireless. So when we switch over to the cellular data connection, if it's available, until this Wi-Fi is stronger, that would be a secondary option. That's, if we are in the range also for cell tower signal. If the battery doesn't charge on the smartphone or the tablet, we would check the charger, the connection to its charger, or it's also the rated amp. Check the charging port on the device. The laptop charging ports are also susceptible to dust and debris, so we want to clean that. And we want to use the USB port on the laptop and desktop computer. Then we want to enable that and making sure that it's capable of connecting devices that will be fast charging. We can test it with the known good cable and replace the battery or have the unit service. So to answer the next question number 12 says that the client complains that his smartphone cannot be charged. How can you help the client troubleshoot the problem? Make sure that the charger is rated for the smartphone. Make sure that we check the charging port on the device. Check the ports that would be susceptible to dust and debris so we can clean that. And so that section that we just went over, you want to clip some of those answers and you can include that, or you can summarize it. You don't have to put it verbatim for number 12. And for 13, it tells you that Gary asked you to help him troubleshoot his tablet. Few apps are not able to load. How would you help Gary troubleshoot this issue? We would check available storage space. We would uninstall apps that we don't use. And we will close all the active apps and see if there is still also an issue. If for the web-enabled app, we want to make sure that the device has connection. So we want to configure Wi-Fi. Now, sometimes you have a ghost cursor, and that is just because it would just be moving on its own. So ghost cursor is caused by mouse movement that's too fast compared to the screen refresh rate. So we can adjust the mouse properties in the settings. If the pointer drift, that can be caused accidentally or swiping or pressing on the device. If using the mouse, we can disable the touchpad or changing its sensitivity settings. And that way it will be at a certain sensitive level to touch. If the laptop doesn't have power, we wanted to check power connection to it. We wanted to make sure that the power is pressed. We can use the voltmeter to test the AC connection to that laptop, or what we call the laptop charger. And sometimes the plug is bad or it's dirty, so we can clean that up and be able to reconnect. If we don't have wireless connection, we want to make sure that we configure and check the configuration for the available network and how we communicate with that network. Sometime if we're using a Wi-Fi adapter, if that's external, it could be loose or it's not configured. So we want to make sure that there's device manager, go to device manager and install driver. We also wanted to check to see if we're using Wi-Fi antenna on our adapter and if the antenna is working. And flip Bluetooth, if there's no activity, we want to make sure that the Bluetooth adapter is installed and restart after that, and also the Bluetooth configuration. So the next thing that it goes over is to look at no display, and it provides you with a list of different things that you can go through to look at the touchscreen. Be able to use dry hands, test the screen, touch the screen to see if it's still not responsive, and then also the section on app loading following. So the answer that we just went over earlier is on app loading. And sometime, if you're running out of RAM, you would get into the situation when app is not going to load. If the system is out of space, the app won't run. And so we can free up storage, or we can add new RAM or additional RAM to our system so it increases the performance. So we would then close the apps or remove the apps that would require more performance, and then free up that resources for other apps itself. So for question 14, it asks you, in mobile devices, what is the cost for the swollen battery? And swollen battery is a problem when you overcharge. So if you're overcharging the battery, it would swell physically. And so the device becomes warped or uneven. Sometimes you would see this on laptop where the battery's on the bottom, and when it swells, you're unable to sit the laptop evenly on a flat surface. And in other devices, it might show as well. So we wanted to use a battery and put it through the complete cycle, and then be able to use it until the end and then charge it fully and then use it again. Because as some of the old battery, it has the memory of the charge cycle. So when you charge it less and less, it reduces that. So for the next section, it talks about how we would be able to work with slow performing devices, or if we're unable to decrypt email, making sure that we check our services and the configuration for the email. You can also visit for more information on mail encryption techniques. And if there's missing security certificate, that can also prevent the system from obtaining or decrypt the email. So some of the things to keep notes of is don't overcharge the device's battery, keep OS update, use the phone battery helper app or manufacturer app in order to manage your battery, shut down iOS devices, and making sure that your devices are completely off, just not the main computer and the screen is still on. Then in the extreme cold or heat situation, climate can also be considered. So when it's really cold, you want to make sure that you warm it up with something warmer so that way it will be working. And overheating can happen to mobile devices, so we wanted to adjust power control, making sure that the tablet or the smartphone, when it's not in use, shut it off, and also to use protective case or fan to be able to cool those devices off. Frozen system is that it just halted and nothing happens. So just sometimes after the lock screen, it does pause a little bit before it will load. So then we also wanted to check for updates, if we properly shut down the system, and so on. Then it goes into GPS not working. Sometimes you might work with a system that has GPS. You use GPS on your smartphone every day. Now, in the documentation and label, we can look at the cable and the connection of the cable to the system. So I want to keep the parts organized. We wanted to have compartments if we have a container to keep our parts, especially the small parts from the mobile devices. We wanted to use anti-static type of container or bags in order to store the things that we remove that could be damaged by static electricity, such as RAM, CPU, and so on. We would always go to the manufacturer resources to identify or read the support behind it. Now, sometimes you also would run across printer issues, and you would have printer streaks on the laser printer. It's because it's print uneven, and sometimes it's, if you're using a new toner cartridge, it might be that it's not evenly spread, so we want to shake it. And then on the inkjet, sometimes you see smudge print, and that could be from the type of paper that you're using. So we wanted to clean the print head, and if the cleaning process doesn't result, so we would set the system for calibration and clean, and it will do that. We would want to check to see if the type of paper that we use is correct, and if the R roller is able to handle that. Thermal printer are often found in your receipt printing or labels printing, and the causes of this is that sometimes the print head is the problem. So we want to replace a certain part of the actual printer. So one of the areas you can look at is to replace, if the pre-printed ink on the media is sticking to the print head, replace the media with the media printed. Okay. With the direct thermal printer, check to see if the stored paper or an incorrect setting is on the printer driver. Now for the print speed, if you set it too high, that will not also be effective, so it's going to cause issues, especially for the thermal. If the printer can be used in either direct or thermal transfer mode, an incorrect driver setting can cause the print to print poorly. Impact printers are very similar to typewriter, where it would lay the print by pressing onto the actual paper, and you would see these as the print where they have multiple parts formed for carbon copy. That will be the impact printer. This is an old type of printer, but it is still being used. So in the case of the dot matrix impact printer, if the dried out ink ribbon is no longer good, then it won't be able to print anything. You often see also faded prints on laser printer or inkjet printer or thermal printer. And here in the text, it listed out different things for you to identify the causes and how to fix the problem. So printers play a very important role in a lot of businesses, especially for retailing and so on, as most businesses require some kind of print now that even though we digitize most of the things that we're using. So for CompTIA A+, make sure that you know how to troubleshoot different types of printer. And you can always refer to your notes for documentation and trying to remember how to be able to troubleshoot it, because there's a section on troubleshooting printer. And sometimes you would have paper jam, rolling issues, and I think we touch a little bit on that in the lab. Sometimes paper loading tray, there might be a small piece of paper being jammed somewhere, and that can cause the roller not to cause jam on the roller. So here it gives you a lot of the tips on how to deal with the specific type of issues with vertical lines and so on. In Windows, we have a thing called Print Spooler, and that allows us to use it when the printer goes offline. So you can release print jobs and kill jobs in the queue. So it does have an option for you to store the information for those jobs, and it walks you through that here. So to finish up our questions, the question 16 asks, your work laser printer causes streaks on print. How do you correct the issues? Replace the toner cartridge. For 17, you ask to troubleshoot a thermal printer at the sales terminal. The test print shows faded image. What can you do to fix the problem? It's because the transfer ribbon might be installed backwards. So we would remove the ribbon, verify proper loading, and reinstall. If the ribbon is installed correctly, then there's still a problem and the ribbon might not be compatible with the media. So that might be the type of ribbon. Check the media settings on the printer configuration to verify. For question 18, it asks you, how do you troubleshoot a printer that has paper feeding problem? With an inkjet, the laser, or the impact printer, run a single sheet of paper and check the paper's position from the paper tray. Remove the paper and fan it and then replace it, because if you fluff the paper, sometimes it doesn't stick together, and that will also help. If the problem continues, check to see if there's paper jam. Sometimes it might be a very small piece. And we want to look at the rollers. If the rollers are worn out, that can also cause the issue. With the printer that uses continuous feeding paper, check the tension of the feeding roller and the position of the operation of the tractor feed. For question 19, when the printer has the paper jam issues, what should you check? We want to check the paper type, the media caught in the printer if there's pieces of paper, the paper path in the tray to the roller. So making sure that we remove all the pieces, and then to also check the roller itself. How do you troubleshoot printing blank pages? If the toner is new, then make sure that the tape was removed from the toner cartridge, because that's preventing from printing. The printer might need to be feeding 2 or more sheets of paper each time. Then we're going to remove the paper, fan it, and ensure that the paper is not sticking together, and we're going to reinsert it. Because it might be that it's sticking together and it's going to print the empty page. We're going to retry the job, and we want to check for the network print. Many of the network printers are configured to eject blank pages between the print jobs, so check the configuration for that. Some printers, you start the print job, it uses rear paper slots before you insert the paper, so the paper placed in the rear paper slot before the print job starts might be ejected. So those are some of the things, and you can also find this in the notes as well. And it walks you through on how to look at print job, clear print job, and open print job. Now, if you have low memory, if the printer's memory is full, it's not going to be able to process the print. So most laser printer, it uses what's called the compressing data onto the actual RAM itself. So what we can do is, if we're using the printer to print something, we can reduce the resolution on the printer to print. So reduce the graphic resolution is going to also help. Eliminate the or reduce the size of the graphic, the data size itself. We can also convert the color to something that's more plain. The printer will not print if the user or the person that operates the print or the system doesn't have access to it. So we want to make sure that we check the settings on the network and the permissions, whether it's granted or not. And like usual, we wanted to check cable connection, power connection, and or wireless connection, and then the printer configuration itself. If we're processing color print and if it's a wrong print, then we want to look at the clog print head or the low color toner. So we might need to replace that, or if it's empty, but usually the printer notifies you if the ink is going out. Now the blank page information is also on the last page, and this is what was included in our question previously. So there you have it. You have the second part of chapter 5, in which I summarize the main points. But for A+, make sure that you go through the details, looking at the step, knowing how to troubleshoot printer, display, and drives. You are likely going to get those type of questions on the practice test or the certification itself. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that I help you with the assignments. And this concludes my video for CIS25 unit.